And I have a loud voice, so I don't think that'll be a problem for everyone here. But I'm really excited to be here as well. As you heard, I'm an OBGYN, and I graduated from residency, which I did at Sisters in 2013. So I've been in practice with Tony Pivarunas in a little office that's right next to Sisters Hospital since then. So basically, Annie just asked me to talk to you about how I came to be a pro-life OBGYN and a Catholic, pro-life OBGYN, truly Catholic, which may not seem in this circle to be so rare, but in my circle, you know, the greater medical sphere, it's extremely rare to be an obstetrician who doesn't prescribe birth control. I mean, that's like unheard of. That's the bread and butter of most OBGYNs. So it's a hopefully not too long of a story, and I have some notes here because I'm still claiming pregnancy brain, so in case I lose my way. But as I was going through this, you know, giving my testimony, I think the great thing about a testimony is that it really shows you how much God has been working in your life. Sometimes we can get down and out about ourselves and think like, oh, why doesn't God do great things in my life? He does great things. Look at her, you know, they just had this miraculous cure in their family or what have you. But when you actually go through your testimony, you're like, wow, he did that, and then he brought me there. And it was really very beautiful for me to put this together. So I encourage you, even if you're not asked or need to give your testimony to anyone in particular, it's a great exercise in your prayer life to just sit down and kind of go through, like, how, I'm sorry, I'm not technically on call, but let me just see who this okay, not the hospital. To go through that and just say, wow, you know, see, how did God bring you to your spouse? How did God bring you to your parish? And how did God bring you to the current group of friends you have? And I think that you might discover things that you had perhaps overlooked before. So I guess my story, you know, begins, I was raised in a Catholic family. I was a cradle Catholic, but not fully appreciative or, I guess, fully aware of my faith either. But one thing that was very strong within my family was the pro-life sentiment. My mom was very pro-life, and I remember in high school going out in front of the abortion clinic and praying the rosary there with my mom, and I remember being like the great debater in high school about abortion and how wrong it was, and having multiple debates with many friends. And so that was the sentiment that I had. And I knew that it had entered my mind in high school if I should be a doctor, but I always thought, well, I really just want to be a mom, so I don't think that's going to work out, God. And then I'd kind of just move past that. And, you know, going into college, somehow I found myself to be a biology major, pre-med major. I'm not really sure how that came about because I loved like the liberal arts. My favorite things were Spanish and history and literature. And so I really haven't made that realization. I don't know how I got there exactly. But in terms of going into college, I think that was the first time that I really felt God's hand in my life. My parents went to Notre Dame. My dad went to Notre Dame, and before it was co-ed, my mom went to the sister school there, St. Mary's of the Lake. And that's where they met. And so my lifelong dream had been to go to Notre Dame. And, you know, I had the GPA for it. That was like I was going there. And then my oldest brother ended up going to this crazy school called Franciscan University of Steubenville, which we called Stupidville. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going there, still going to Notre Dame. And so I, you know, got into whatever it is, your senior year, and I started applying. I applied to 2 colleges, Notre Dame and Franciscan, because my parents made me. And then they dragged me along on this parents' weekend. And so I went out to parents' weekend at Franciscan, and like literally, like driving across the border of the campus, you feel something is different about this place. And I wasn't used to that. And so I went through this weekend, and I could just feel God pulling on my heart, like, this is where you're supposed to be. And I was like, I'm really supposed to be at Notre Dame, just so you know. And so made it through the weekend, and I kind of made a deal with God. I was, how we do that. I was like, God, I can kind of tell you want me to be here, but I don't want to be. So if you want me to come here, you need to change my heart. And I didn't keep praying that on a daily basis. It was like a one-time thing, all right, got to change my heart. And he did. Within the course of a few weeks, I would say, I was fully committed to going to Franciscan. And I got my acceptance letter to Notre Dame in the mail, and the same day wrote them out a letter thank you very much, but no thanks. And so I went to Franciscan. And so that was the first time I just felt God put his hand in my life and dramatically change it from how I would have otherwise had it. Are there any fellow Franciscan alum in the room? No?
I'm originally from Ohio.
All right, we got that. Just wondering.
They don't know Steubenville's in Ohio.
That's right. Steubenville, however you want to call it. So, that was a major transformative time in my life. Because even though I was a cradle Catholic, I got there, my roommates started doing these holy hours, and I was totally unaware of what that was. You do what for an hour? And all of a sudden I was doing those, and then everybody went to daily mass, so I started going to daily mass, and it's just kind of this environment of positive peer pressure to learn about your faith and be a better Catholic, and so it was very transformative. And so I was in the pre-medical program there, and my family at the time was actually out of the country. They were in Saudi Arabia. My dad was working there. And so spring break, my freshman year rolled around, and I really didn't have anywhere to go, and I was looking at options, and I ended up joining up with this mission group that was going down to Mexico. And it was amazing. I went on the spring break mission, and it was with a group of, actually Rainham Christi, it was all ladies, and we had this amazing time. And I've always loved Spanish, and so I was able to use some of my, at that time, pretty primitive Spanish. And one day, they knew that I was pre-med, and so I got to work with this doctor in his office. He didn't speak a lick of English, and so it was a lot of sign language. And I have this very specific memory. We saw a pregnant patient, and she was probably, close to term, very visibly pregnant. And he had me put my hands on her stomach, and I could feel the baby, and he was showing me, okay, the baby's, head down, and we can feel that. And it was remarkable. I was really moved by that. And so between, that experience, I really became enamored of missionary work, and I really became enamored also of the Hispanic population. And the next year, I was on another mission trip down to the border town of El Paso and then Juarez, Mexico. And it was a very pro-life mission, and we were doing a lot of very active pro-life work. And so it was definitely all very transforming me at that time, even though I couldn't necessarily see that. But we were working with women considering abortion, and actually some very probably controversial methods, but I actually went into an abortion clinic and was talking to women inside of the abortion clinic. Don't recommend that necessarily, but it was definitely a very powerful experience. I know. And so the next year, I found myself on a mission trip to Ecuador. I had this friend who was Ecuadorian at Franciscan, and he was like, Jamie, come with us on this mission. I want to start a mission trip to my country. And so I went down to Ecuador, and really, it just really captured my heart, and I loved my time there. The next year, we made it a medical mission, and I led the trip down there. And while I was down there, I felt God telling me that I needed to go back for a longer period of time. And so I'll revisit that. But also during my time at Franciscan, I think it was my freshman year, I can't be positive, but we had a speaker come to Franciscan, a speaker I'd never heard of, but probably all of you have heard of now. His name was Christopher West. And he gave this school-wide address about something else I had never heard of, the theology of the body. And it changed my life. He gave a series of talks, one for women, one for men, and then one for the whole student body. And the two talks I went to it changed my life. All of a sudden, everything made sense. For those who aren't familiar with theology of the body, it's really an entire catechesis from John Paul II, St. John Paul II, that tells us why we are created in the way that we are, why God specifically made us as man and woman, and how beautiful our differences are, and how wonderful our complementarity is. And, for me, being a very biologically, medically minded person, it was like the theology of the biology. And everything was like, oh my gosh, it was like a cover was lifted off of my eyes, and it just made perfect sense. And then through my mission work down in Ecuador, I kept seeing just the brokenness that was down there, the brokenness of the family, especially. The family unit is very injured in the Hispanic population, and in a way that it's different than the injury that we have here in the U.S., but there's very little marriage down there, not because they don't respect the sacrament, which I think is the problem here, but because they do respect the sacrament, and they know that it's for keeps, and they're not ready for that. So they're like, oh, we're not getting married. So there are all these single mothers and these men that are floating in and out of their lives, and I had another very transformative conversation with a fellow missionary. We were driving through the Andes Mountains. I can remember the scenery as we were talking, but I was talking to her. Her name's Monica. I said, Monica, I think the theology of the body is the answer. I think that's what's going to save Ecuador. It's going to save the Latino population. It's going to save the world. And we were it was like we were the first people who had ever realized that. Oh my gosh, you're right. And so that really became tied up in the whole concept of mission work for me. And so I'm going forward in my studies, and I was applying to medical school. And then I went on this mission trip my senior year of college, and I really felt God saying, you've got to come back here, and you've got to come back for longer. A 9-day mission isn't good enough. And so I went to my parents, and I was like, I think I'm going to be a missionary in Ecuador. I'm going to do that for a year. And my parents were very unsupportive of it, not because they didn't want me to be a missionary, but because they, saw me on this path towards medical school and were very supportive of that. And my mom was probably rightly worried that I would fall in love with this, very wonderful, poor Ecuadorian man and live down there the rest of my life. And she knows me well. So that did not happen, for the record. But so I was very torn. My parents were saying, I think that the best thing is to go on to medical school. And I was knowing in my heart that I had to go back to Ecuador. And so I was very torn, going back and forth. I met up with one of the Franciscan friars on campus for some spiritual direction. And I explained the whole situation to him. And, I said, I just want to honor my parents, Father. What am I supposed to do? And he said, well, Jesus is asking you, Jamie, do you love me more than these? Your primary obligation is to God. And so if this is what he's asking you to do, then you may have to go against the wishes of your parents. And that was really intense and very difficult for me, so I continued to pray about it. And finally I came to the decision, I had peace with the decision that I had to go to Ecuador. And, I went to my parents and I said, guys, I really need to tell you. And my mom said, wait, before you say anything, I want you to know that I really think that you should go to Ecuador. I was like, wow. So I just felt like God wanted me to really commit to that and know that in my heart, that's what I was going to do above everything, kind of like Abraham and Isaac. Are you ready to sacrifice for this? Would you sacrifice your son for me? And that's what God had asked me, would you sacrifice, basically this relationship with your parents to do this for me? And when I said yes, then he made everything else fall into place. So I ended up kind of satisfying both people, my parents and myself. I applied and was accepted to medical school, but then was granted a deferment of my acceptance for 1 year so that I could go down to Ecuador. But then medical school was still waiting for me when I got back. And I went down to Ecuador, and that's a whole nother talk. I had a fantastic experience and just really beautiful and difficult at times. But I did work a lot with women and speaking with them about trying to educate them a little bit about their cycles and about how we're created and mingling in the theology of the body along with that and just the beauty and the intentionality with which we're created. And as you could just see how excited they were to learn about it. But then at the same time, they would say, well, you know, the man, whoever it is, usually not the husband, like he would never understand this. And so that was always the barrier that we came up against. And I was like, oh, we got to get somebody, you know, catechizing these guys. We got to get them in here too. And so I was winding down my year down there and ready to come back to the U.S. And then in my last week, I was asked to be an interpreter for this medical mission coming down. And it was just like fantastic. This mission was amazing, and we had this amazing experience. And I was like, gosh, I'm not sure if I'm ready to go back. I don't know if I'm supposed to go to medical school. And then on the last day of the mission, the gospel reading in Mass that day was the gospel reading, I believe, from Matthew, but unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains but a single grain. But if it dies, it will yield a rich harvest. And I just felt like God was telling me, like, you need to, like, this part of your life has to fade away, and you need to kind of die to this in order to reap good fruit in the next thing that's coming. And I had also been working on several projects in my time down there. We were trying to open a new outpatient hospital, and we were trying actually to bring Franciscan University in a more permanent way to Ecuador with a missionary campus there. And I felt like my projects weren't really going anywhere, and I felt like maybe God was saying if I left, those things would better come to fruition. And so I returned to the U.S., and I returned to medical school. And those things actually did develop and come to fruition in a better way after I left. So I think that God was faithful in that as well. And so I came back and I went to medical school, and definitely probably the hardest 4 years of my life is not an enjoyable experience. At least it was not for me, but also, you know, very formative in its own way. And in medical school, at first I felt very alone, like this lone Catholic in medical school. And then I met this great Catholic girl, and we eventually became roommates, and she is now my sister-in-law because I introduced her to my brother, and they fell in love. And she just had her second baby 2 days ago, praise God, after 4 years of infertility. So, again, glory be to God for that. So we really kind of joined forces, and she was very much just still growing and developing in her faith and leaning strongly on my knowledge, but that also deepened my faith because we were, you know, learning and teaching as we went. And I came out of Ecuador kind of thinking, well, I think I should be a family practice doctor or a general surgeon or something where I can serve the masses, because I really thought that I was still going to be called to missionary work after I graduated. And but I was still a little bit enamored of OBGYN. I thought that was a beautiful specialty. And so in my first year, we engaged in what they call it early clinical contact. So usually you're just totally immersed in the books and lecture and books and lecture. And to give you like a little bit of a breath of fresh air, my medical school would put you 1 day a week for a few hours with a doctor in his office. And the doctor who I went with happened to be an OBGYN. So I was kind of excited. I went out to this guy's office, and his name was Dr. Stan Stanley. I'll never forget that name. And he was like this like super handsome, you know, 6'2", tall, dark, and handsome. Like all of his patients were in love with him. Like from the 16-year-olds through like the 82-year-olds. Like everyone was like, oh, Dr. Stanley. And he ran 2 hours late, always. And like the patients would be so annoyed and grumbling, and as soon as he walked in the room, they'd be like, "It's okay, Dr. Stanley." It's just such a funny office. But in any case, he saw super high patient volume, so saw about 60 to 80 patients a day, which to this day I don't know how he did it. If I see 20 patients in a day, that's a very busy day for me, because I really want to spend time with my patients and delve into things with them. So it was like a factory. That's how I felt when I was in his office. And he was a normal OBGYN and prescribed contraception. So I felt like I was in this like contraception factory. And, you know, we would, kind of like Annie was saying, we'd be scheduling someone's C-section with their second baby, and he'd be having them sign on the dotted line, okay, can we tie your tubes then too? And It was just like, I felt like I was in like this alternate reality, like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And I walked out of his office the first day I was there, and I called my mom, and I started crying. And I was like, Mom, I can't be an OBGYN. It's too crazy, and it's too difficult, and I can't fight this, and I can't go against the stream this much. And she was like, Jamie, who's asking you to be an OBGYN? I was like, oh, okay, all right, so I won't be an OBGYN. Like, I think that I had all this internal pressure on myself. So I kind of put that on the back burner. And then the year after the first year of medical school, before the second, is like your last summer vacation ever of your life. And most students will find an internship or something that's educational, because we can't enjoy ourselves. We've got to do something that's productive. So my roommate, my sister-in-law now, she found this organization in her home city, Dayton, Ohio, called One More Soul. Some of you may have heard of them. They are a fantastic little nonprofit organization, and their tagline is educating people about the benefits of children and the harms of contraception. And so we went to work with them. I think for 2 months we were there, and that profoundly changed basically the way that I thought about the pro-life movement. I had been very anti-abortion in my approach to the pro-life movement, but my time with them and interning with them, and they educated us. Actually, I learned a lot about natural family planning, but we learned a lot about contraception, stuff that I wasn't learning in medical school. And I really came to see that contraception was the root of so much that had gone wrong in our society. And so I really came to see, like, that was a lot of the problem with marriage, and it was the problem why we have abortion is because we've introduced contraception and we've separated the active intercourse from its natural consequence, which is babies. And we learned so much in that. It was really just 8 weeks we were there. And they sent us off to this conference of the American Academy of Fertility Care Professionals, which I knew nothing about, but is the group that Dr. Hilgers of the Creighton model, for those of you that are familiar with that. That's the group of medical professionals that belong to his organization. And, all through medical school, people have been telling me, you can't be an OBGYN if you don't prescribe contraception, and you can't do it if you don't do tubal sterilization. And we need more abortionists. My goodness, the abortionist industry is dying out. So if you're going to be an OBGYN, you should be an abortionist too. Plus, it's good money. These are the messages that I'm getting as a medical student. And then I went out to this group, and there were probably over 200, maybe 250 physicians, family practice doctors, and OBGYNs who were all Catholic, faithful Catholic doctors, and by that I mean they were actually following the teachings of the Catholic Church and not prescribing birth control, not doing sterilization, not doing tubal ligation or vasectomy, male sterilization. And that was another huge aha moment. I wrote in my journal, I thought the ceiling opened up and this beam of light was shining down on me, and God was saying, you should be an OBGYN. And I really just became convinced of that in my heart in the course of this 3-day conference. And so I went back to medical school, entered into my second year and beyond with that goal in mind. I was going to be an OBGYN and I could do it. And because I had seen all these people who were already doing it, I thought, and none of their kids were starving, and I was like, okay, they're doing okay. They don't have holes in their pants. I can do it, and I'll survive, and God will find a way. And so I proceeded through the rest of my time in medical school, and then it comes to the time when you have to find a residency. And that is extremely hard to do if you don't want to do birth control, tubal sterilization, and or abortion. And so I started looking at all the Catholic hospitals, and I started looking, I was in contact with a few other medical students who had gone before me who had similar desires. And so I started looking at the places they were at. And I came up with 3 top choices. One was in St. Louis, one was in Texas, and then there was this one up in Buffalo. but I was not going to move north. I was not going to stay in the north because I went to college at Franciscan. I went to medical school at Ohio University, so I'd been in Ohio for 8 years, and I was done with winter. So, like, I put Buffalo as my number 3. But then I came up, and I spent a month up here, and I met Tony Pivarunas. And for those of you who know him, he is just about the most wonderful person you could ever know. That's him in a nutshell. But he's extremely humble. He's extremely giving. He talks the talk, but he also walks the walk. He and his wife have 12 children. And, like, the most beautiful family you'll ever meet. Like, just, his kids are amazing. And you agree. I know they are. They're just fantastic. And I was like, wow, this place is really great, God, but it's in Buffalo, and it's really cold. And so I applied, and I actually left Buffalo as my number 3. And it's a very convoluted process how residencies go, but you rank your residency, and then the residency program ranks you, and there's this very complicated algorithm, and then you're assigned a residency. So I actually happened to be in Ecuador on a mission trip back with Franciscan, but as a medical resident when the decisions came out. And I had a cell phone with me in the middle of the jungle. There's still signal now. There's signal everywhere. So I had my roommate checking for me. You know, she had my password, and she was going to text me one word, like St. Louis, Houston, or Buffalo. So I'm in the middle of the Amazon jungle, and I get this text message saying, Buffalo. And I texted her back, are you sure? Like she would, like, mess that up, right? Only, like, the most important decision in our lives that far. And she texts back, yes. And I started crying. And I cried for about 4 hours. Like, God, you cannot be sending me to Buffalo. This is not true. And the first thought of everything that enters my mind is like, I'll never find a husband in Buffalo. I don't know why. I thought Buffalo was, like, so bad for husbands, but like, for some reason, I was like, oh. So, you know, we get out of the jungle, and I found a payphone, and I called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm going to Buffalo, and I'll never find a husband there. And she was like, no, Jamie, I think maybe you could find your husband. I just have this feeling right now. And I was like, no. And then this priest who was on our mission, who I was very close with, I worked with him while I was living there. And I went to him, and he saw, like, what a mess I was. And I was like, Padre, I'm going to go to Buffalo. And he goes, Jamie, I think that's where you're going to meet your husband. And I was like, you guys got to stop saying this. Like, I don't want to go there. I'm going to see if I can change it. Which you can't, like, set in stone. So I came to Buffalo. Like, I was driving my car. My dad's driving the U-Haul behind me. Literally, I remember I was driving past the Angola exit, and I'm sobbing. Like, the closer I get to Buffalo, I'm like, I can't believe I'm coming here. And I had the worst attitude about it, even though I knew that I liked this program. And of all the programs I looked at, it was the most Catholic and would, you know, be fully supportive, because Dr. Pivarunas is also the director of the residency program. And he, of course, is fully supportive and has worked hard to build this residency to be a place that's formative for Catholics. And I had the worst attitude, so I start orientation, and I'm, like, just so angry about being in Buffalo. And I went to the hospital chapel, and I sat down, and I said, God, you have got to change my attitude, because I have the worst attitude about this. I can't change it. I feel awful about being here, and I'm about to start, like, you know, the second hardest 4 years of my life, and I can't go into it with this attitude. So within a couple of days, I got to say, God can work pretty quickly. I noticed that my attitude was completely changed, completely transformed. I was actually happy about being here, and I went forward with my studies, and but still determined that I would never meet my husband in Buffalo. Well, let's see. In my second or third year of residency is 4 years. I was in a delivery with this very nice lady and her husband, and she also went to Franciscan University, a few years ahead of me. So we started talking, and we had a wonderful delivery, beautiful baby girl. And this woman went back to her brother and said, I just met this great doctor, and I think that you should meet her. And he said, no, I'm not going to be set up. And then a couple of months later, I was at this ladies group of mostly married ladies. Myself and another woman were the only single people there. But we'd all get together about once a month, and we prayed and talked a lot and drank wine. But then I met this girl. This girl came right up to me, and she said, oh my gosh, you have to go on a date with my brother. Will you go on a date with my brother? This is a different girl. And I said, sure, have him find me on Facebook or, tell him to look me up. So she went back to her brother and said, you have to go out with this girl. And both of these girls were sisters, and they didn't know that the other person had met me. And they worked on my very stubborn now husband until he eventually asked me out. And we went out, and we went out the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And within 6 months, we were engaged. And 1 year and a day later, we were married. So, and that was just over 3 years now. And we have 2 children. This Max is our second, and my first is 2.5. He's at home. So I did. God proved himself correct, and then I did meet my husband in Buffalo, which is hard to do when you're an OBGYN and all of your patients are either married and having babies or in other types of relationships and having babies, but it did turn out to work out well. So I'm now in practice with Tony Pivarunas, and our practice is an authentically Catholic practice in that we do not prescribe contraception at all, except in rare circumstances where there's no other medical option, and that's an extremely rare circumstance. And we usually do it in a way where we know that it won't have any abortifacient effect. But we really work with our patients, and we promote and have a lot of patients who do use natural family planning. And it's an entirely different talk altogether, but something, if anyone has questions on, you can always ask me. But just how much better that is for the woman, health-wise, spiritually, etc. So in any case, that's how I came to be here, and thank you very much for listening.